Welcome to the Lost Signals Discusses Film and TV. Using the revolutionary Manzur-Mosi Thurlow scale,
or MONS,
we scrupulously review these art forms with an emphasis on narrative structure. Join us for another entertaining episode. Hello, and welcome back to the Lost Signals Discusses Film and Television. Today, we are talking about a film that is, well, as of right now, not even out yet. In the U.S., that is. It is Hector Babenco's last film before he died, the Brazilian filmmaker. And the movie in Brazil was called My Hindu Friend. I believe it is coming out in the U.S. under the title My Last Friend. Full disclosure, we were contacted. Info. Yeah, we were contacted by the production studio to talk about this film, and we decided to take a look because Willem Dafoe's in it, and I like Willem Dafoe, and I think we all do.
We tried to get an interview with him, but probably not happening.
Yeah. We asked to see if Willem would be interested in an interview. Didn't hear back about that one, strangely enough. But in the meantime,
The Lighthouse is on all of our top 5.
Yes, absolutely. The Lighthouse is number 1 for me.
So contact us, Willem.
Yeah, Willem, get in touch with us. We'll get you on the horn.
Love your work, sir.
But in the meantime, we're going to do a review of the film. My Hindu Friend, I believe, is the original title. I am going to be your host, Steve Ramosi, joined today by Ian Manzur.
Now, I'm going to say that we're going to do a slightly different type of review because we don't want to spoil anything. So it's going to be a vaguer review than usual. Yeah. So, yeah.
And Chris Morgan.
Being vague.
And Scott Thurlow.
See you in the hospital.
So, I'm going to start off with the logline. I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying this is My Hindu Friend and My Enemy Cancer. Mm. And, Ian, why don't you start us off with the plot?
So, this is a film about Willem Dafoe playing a director named Diego who has been diagnosed terminally with cancer. He's going for kind of at the time, experimental treatment with bone marrow to get fixed. And it is his dive through facing mortality, facing death, a creative individual, and this isn't quite a bit of magic realism as it is imaginary realism. With there's a lot of scenes where it goes into his kind of the world that he builds around his stories, and the title comes from a little boy he befriends who is a Indian child, although he's only about like a quarter of the movie, so. It's more of a story of Willem Dafoe and the people he surrounds himself with and the lifestyle of being he's a director that used to be famous. It's kind of fallen off. And the social circles he runs in, his loves, things like that.
And sort of the fallout from after he gets diagnosed.
And I'm going to say this, that it's a messy film in the sense that life is messy. It feels like very autobiographical. It feels like someone telling stories about their lives the way they remember it. Thus, there are threads that fall off. There are people who enter and leave, just like life. So, it sacrifices narrative throughput for trying to tell a very real story. And it's trying more for emotional closure than it is for narrative closure. But overall, I was entertained by the film. It was heavily supported by Willem Dafoe's performance, which was fantastic. So I'm probably going to give it a 2.
Yeah, so I'll say this. The title credit, or like right before the film starts, there's a little blurb, I believe from Hector himself, that says, "This is a story of what happened to me and told the only way I know how." So yeah, like that sort of feeds into like sort of the perhaps not perfectly A to B nature of it. But yeah, I think looking at it too, it had its bumps, I would say, here and there, and maybe that's sort of the nature of it. As you mentioned, it's heavily, if not 100% autobiographical. So yeah, life is messy, and this is like what he was dealing with, what he was doing, his interactions with his relationships, and his the dynamic with his friends and family and so forth. But I think overall, it told an emotional story, as you said, and certainly as sort of channeled by Dafoe's performance. So yeah, I think it's a solid 2 overall as well for me.
I agree. It's going to get a 2. I like the messiness aspect of it because life is messy. But what you said just occurred to me why the boy is so important. Because I don't know how vague we're going to, how specific we're going to get, but...
Let's say pretty vague.
All right. With regard to Dafoe's character, however much or however little time the film spends with him and him talking with this boy does serve to pivot his character. It just, I was trying to put it together, and when you were giving the plot, something gelled for me. And all of a sudden, I'm going to say that for what time there is, I do see his importance with regard to Dafoe's character. I do like the messiness of life. There are some scenes that I just thought were really great. And I just, like I said, overall, I think you guys said it over. I'm going to give it a strong 2.
Yeah, I'm going to steal a thing that you often say, Chris, is that his Hindu friend was sort of a catalyst to from that point onwards in his life.
There's a lot about this plot that feels uneven to me.
Yeah, largely.
I mentioned to you guys before we started podcasting that I like the back half of the movie better than I like the front half.
I would tend to also back that up.
I think that it gels more. There were parts in the beginning that I thought felt really disconnected from the rest of the movie. And there were parts of at the end that I felt the same way about, but not
less
nearly
so.
as much.
Yeah.
So I guess what I want to say is this is a flawed plot. I think that maybe not everybody will feel this way, but to me it felt like the Babenco, I believe, wrote this as well, and I feel like he was too close to his own
material
story to fully
step back from it a bit,
engage in the story the way that it could have been engaged with. And I wanted to see more from it. I'm probably going to give this a 1. You guys make good arguments.
Let's see.
But and there are points of this movie that are good. I give a lot of credit, and I will give a lot of credit later on to the style of it. I think it looks great, but it's just a little too disconnected for me. So I'm going to give it a 1, I think.
That's fair. I totally don't begrudge you. Like, yes, I certainly agree that it is a bit disjointed, disconnected, but that's why I'm docking it a point and not 2, but I see it.
Because I see where you're coming from, because the first half of this movie, I have to say, to a certain point, I pretty much couldn't stand anybody in it. But when the messiness of it, I think that's a really important point that they caught the messiness of it, that how deep or superfluous people can be at any given time, at any social situation. That the moments of character, whether they're main or fleeting, I think is what gels this film. And I guess we'll get to style when we talk about editing. But so I get with, I understand you, but I'm also giving it a 2 because
I'm not going to justify my 2 to you.
That's fine. You don't have to. And we're about to go on to themes, but before we do that, maybe this is a good time to point out that the first question of this is going to be 3 points, because there might be new people listening in on this episode. The first question is 3 points out of 3, and every other question after that is out of 1. So we're going to move on to themes. And Chris, do you want to tell us?
And it's all binary, no half scores. The basic theme of this film is somebody facing their mortality and finding all the reasons to live, whether it is narcissism or whether it's genuine love of life, or whether it's a purpose to make one last film. I think it really, one of the things that really plays into a lot that does keep coming back to all the little characters, and there's a lot of great little moments in this movie that kind of help accentuate again how superfluous people are, how deep people are depending upon the situation. I do think it was a really great study of what keeps people motivated to keep going on. Whether it's in a moment or whether it's the greater scheme, and here's a man facing his mortality. And I'm going to say one thing because it happens right at the beginning of the film, so I don't think it's much of a spoiler. When he and his wife are driving from the oncologist, and she's like, well, you know, if one of us could die, I wish it was me. And he's basically like, bullshit. If one of us could die, I wish it was you. Mm-hmm. You know, it's just like, my whole point is that while it is a flawed film, I really didn't like anybody at the beginning of this film. I think that was I'm loath to say brave, but that is that is something that's very honest. That's not very Hollywood. So, I'm going to give it a 1 because I thought that the themes were dealt with overtly or whether inadvertently. I don't know. What's the opposite of overtly?
Themes
covertly.
I would
covertly
say inadvertently.
Not inadvertently, but whether you're dealing with it directly or whether it is a reflection of the overall theme, if it's even fleeting. That's my whole point.
So different cultures handle grief differently. And we generally, because we watch a lot of American films, look at the American perspective of it. This is looking through the Brazilian perspective of it. And one of the...
Well, this guy, the director, is originally Argentinian and then moved to Brazil. So just a little background.
Yeah, the South American kind of viewpoint, although I don't want
It did throw me off that Willem Dafoe was supposed to be Argentinian and sure. as his background. But anyway, go on.
Nonetheless, the highlight of sex in here and the inability to perform is a huge part attacking of his character as a male, which from what I understand about like the South American, that plays a big role in identity down there. And to see how the characters around him, both like him dealing with his wife, who they get married after he's diagnosed. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm interested to see how much she expected him to stick around when the 3 months that he was supposed to live passes those 3 months, and then she has to actually deal with the repercussions of him continuing with the medication and continuing to be like a poor health. And it's to me, it was an interesting look at a different culture's perspective on it. And yes, you're right about what you're saying. It's very close to the author. Mm. But I felt like I knew who this person was. And I feel that it wasn't either him building a grandiose view. He was very, very honest, perhaps even too honest at points over what he went through. So I felt like this was a very, very personal film. Yes. And to see his struggles. And also, I've dealt with family members of my own who've gone through cancer and other similar deadly illnesses. And it is, they captured that quite well in this. I think that it was one of the more honest portrayals of illness and the suffering that you have to go through and the questions you have to ask and how it doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone around you. So I really actually enjoyed what he had to say about illness, even if it was his point of view on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the themes of this are some of the more poignant parts of this, especially later on in the film, and I won't say much about it, but like there is that dealing with illness and the stages that you go through when you're dealing with illness, and being the person you are versus being the person you are before and the person you are after. I think that plays a large part in the movie, and it's interesting to see the way that Dafoe portrays that change, and I think he does it well. All that to say, I think that themes are going to get a pretty strong one in this.
Well, I haven't spoken yet, but you guys covered a lot. But yes, certainly it's sort of, as you mentioned, I like the fact that it's maybe you might say he was too close to the material because it's his story of his life, but that means you get an intimate look at it, right? So he's sort of like sort of a fading artist, but still is very much into his craft and is faced with a life-threatening situation. And that means like then it explores like, and it shows his flaws. Like he's sort of quite honest about the person how he acted and what being faced with that, how it changed his relationships and his interactions with friends and family and so forth. But yeah, I think it's a very interesting look at that stuff, and as you guys mentioned, portrayed well by Willem Dafoe. That yeah, it's a very sort of insightful look into that mindset when a person who's in that situation is faced with it, and how they react and how that changes them, how they sort of go through the stages and so forth, and where they end up at the other end of the road, if you will. Yeah, I'm going to give it a 1 officially because I think it was explored quite well and portrayed quite well, regardless of the the disjointedness of the plot, as we just talked about.
So, sounds like one's all around for that. Scott, why don't you continue with antagonists?
Alrighty, so again, like the messiness of life, as E pointed out, like I know, like I often fall back to a broad nebulous sort of concept, but I think in this case it's more fitting. Like yes, you might say like being faced with a terminal illness, like of course that's on paper, right? In the flow of things, that's what you're going to say was what he's fighting. But really, it's just like how that again affects his mindset and his sort of relationship to his craft and what he sees himself as. Right? He's like, I want to make one more film. You know, I just want to keep doing what I love. And even though I was going to say just before that, in terms of the plot of the film, it sets up that he's like sort of fading. Like he once was a well-known, respected director, and like people still know who he is, but he's not like as popular, not as well-known. Like, right, his glory is sort of like rusted a bit, if you will. But I still think like, you know, being faced with such a situation and then meeting his Hindu friend, like how that, as you said, Chris, how that sort of catalyzes him and to change the dynamic with his family, friends, his wife, etc. So yeah, like I think it's an effective one. He certainly was antagonized by it, and perhaps even himself to a degree, I think, and that came through, I think, through the character as well. So yeah, I think it's pretty strong, a pretty solid one on the antagonistic front for me.
Sure.
I like to think of, if you want to talk about the concept of death, and the thing is, there is a character called the Common Man, which is, I guess, a hallucination or whatever.
Well, let's not get into
it. No. Hold on a second. There is
hold on a second.
There is a representation, a manifestation of the idea, and I think to Scott's point, they dealt with it a greater theme personally, but it was also part of the bigger conversation, like at the party at their wedding reception. They're talking about various aspects of it with relation to him. And since the film is focused on his character, I think that, you know, we can definitely say that death was an antagonist.
Yeah, I mean, at least the specter of death, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's this interesting give and take that happens throughout the film with him and his ideas of death, we'll say, without getting too in-depth about it. But, like, yeah, I agree. His arc makes him his own antagonist at some points, but I don't really necessarily believe that he is exactly his own antagonist. It's kind of
I think there's an eb and flow, like
the specter of the illness that is upon him that is really the antagonist throughout the movie, and he deals with it the entire time. Willem Dafoe lost a lot of... I don't even know if he lost a lot of weight. Willem Dafoe looks like a corpse.
He looks gaunt as hell. You know.
Maybe that's just what he looks like in everyday life, but he seemingly went through some sort of body transformation and also probably a lot of like, you know, makeup and stuff like that as well. But you could tell he's battling. You could tell his character is battling in this movie, and I think
he looks illness-stricken.
I think it does well to bring that out, and I think it does a good job of showing that fight that's happening internally for him. And I think that's the most important battle. You know, he has this battle with his own being an asshole who thinks he's more clever than anybody else.
As a narcissistic artist,
which I'm not 100% convinced that Babenco. I hate to speak ill of the dead, but I'm not 100% convinced that Babenco didn't just think he was the smartest person in every room he's ever been in based on this movie, but I think he does a good job highlighting where he just goes too far and
he certainly recognizes
says things
his flaws to an extent.
Yeah. So, Ian, object.
Please. He actually goes through all the stages of grief over the course of this, including anger, which
Denial,
is really at the
etc.
beginning of that. He is very much an asshole to everyone around him because he doesn't want to believe.
But it kind of felt like he's always been that asshole.
Oh, yeah.
This movie is the story of him.
But I think
maybe
his
becoming
situation.
It's highlighted initially because of that kind of thing. He literally bargains with at the point.
Sure.
The specter of death. But it's but I liked him as a kid because it's very real. He's not glorified in any way. If anything, it's perhaps a self-deprecating person highlighting his own flaws in this character or overemphasizing his flaws in there. But I don't know. I actually think I would be friends with this guy, as much of an asshole as he is. Perhaps I saw a little bit of myself.
I was going to say that because you see yourself.
We're talking about the antagonist to the protagonist.
Sorry, I thought we were on protagonist.
No,
the antagonist is, I see myself in death. But death and cancer cancer will always get a 1. It's a terrible disease that roots people. Chemotherapy is actually a great antagonist as well because that is
it's brutal.
It's a harrowing
Are
process.
they saying, isn't it part the thing is most people die of the treatment before the cancer will kill them?
Yeah, I assume so. I'm a doctor. So.
That happens very often.
Yeah, that's one of the aspects of it.
Sure.
That they did deal with.
So I feel we covered both antagonists and protagonists a lot.
Well, a little bit.
Well, we're on to protagonists. We all gave antagonist 1, I believe, right?
Yes.
We're going to go talk about protagonists. Willem Dafoe plays Diego, the stand-in for Hector Babenco, the director of this. This is basically an autobiography of him and his first bout with cancer and getting over it, here's a spoiler. You could just find it in his biography. He beats cancer. And it's about him going through the treatments, the process, and dealing with all this stuff. There are points where I absolutely there's 3 different things that I'm going to mention about this character, Diego. And there are 2 that are positive and there's 1 that's negative. So there are points where I absolutely hate him, which I think is intended, and that's a positive as much as it sounds like. But you're supposed to hate this character at certain points, right? Exactly. There are points where I really identify with him, and I like him as a person in certain ways. Not that I say that everything not that I throw away all the times that he was a dick, but there are times where I'm oh yeah, I see myself in this. I completely understand where he's coming from, and I like where this is going. There are also times where, and I guess I'm just gonna have to keep harping on this because it's just the thing that keeps coming to mind is there are times where he's just written as somebody who's too full of himself for reality. There are times where I'm this person isn't fucking real. There's a party scene right in the beginning, and I'm not going to go into specifics about it.
I like that scene quite a bit.
A couple, sure. It's stylistically, it's great. Dialogue-wise, I'm not the biggest fan. But there are parts of it where I'm this is just stupid. This is supposed to be a smart guy, and the things he's saying are, silly a couple times, and it really bothered me. But other than that, I think I'm going to give him a 1 overall because I do have the parts of him that are important to his character that are really good, and I think that and again, I said this earlier, but I think the movie really gets to track in the second half, and I think that he does a good job. Dafoe does a good job of really tapping into taking what this character was, not giving away what the character was, but changing the character, having all that with him, but being a new, like, make himself into a new person. And I think it does really well in that.
I'm just going to say something real quick, because I'm going to give him a 1 as well. And I think we've floated around this a lot, but I am going to say this. If this is an autobiographical representation, and if Dafoe's character is a narcissist and this is autobiographical, then props to the director, because I didn't like Dafoe for most of this film. And the thing is, if you are going to do an autobiography, you should show warts and all. And if this is his story, the warts and all were right there. So I'm going to give him 1, and that's all I'm going to say.
I enjoyed him. I said a lot about him already, but I enjoyed him trolling a bunch of socialites.
That's why. Yeah.
Sure, but he was one as well. This is like fucking Gervais getting up in front of the Golden Globes and be like, all you fucking movie stars shouldn't be saying this shit, while saying the same shit that he said they shouldn't be saying.
I get what you mean, though. I certainly see that, but go on.
Like, that, I don't know. But that's not even a problem that I have.
People like their soapboxes.
All right.
That's not even a problem that I have. I like that part of him doing that because it shows that is a thing that people do. Well,
that's what I'm going to get to. Like, it was a multifaceted character. And yeah, like you said, Chris, warts and all. Like, now maybe Steve-O, you might say, like, he sort of elevated himself above, like, what you thought, like, should have, or would have been the case.
Yeah, everyone else was an idiot, and he was super smart.
But they certainly showed him, like, you know, aspects of his life, even beyond that, where he wasn't always the best guy in the room. He was kind of a dick sometimes. Like, so it didn't paint him in, like, you know, one light only, and as he mentioned, he's going through the stages of grief variously, so therefore, that changes, you know, like, a lot of his reactions and stuff, like, you know, how he talks to people, what he says to people, what he thinks about them, and what he confronts them about. So yeah, I think it was a very, of course, we all sung Willem Dafoe's praises, we all love him as an actor, he's fucking great, and this was no exception, because he encapsulated that sort of, that whole spectrum of emotions and going through what he's going through, and how that change, like I said, how that affects what he deals with and the people important to him, and even, like, you know, random people that he meets as well, and especially the turning point when he meets the Hindu boy who becomes his friend, right? So, like, yes, I'm giving him a 1. I think it was a very well fleshed out character, and I kind of liked him quite a bit because he's kind of a dick sometimes, but, like, that's the situation he's going through, and I think the portrayal shown through that as well.
I agree. I'm going to give him a 1. I think it's 1s all around, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let's move on to supporting. Ian, that's going to be you.
So because he's inherently a narcissist, which I have no problem with these, I'm inherently a narcissist. Every other character in this is almost one note.
Mm-hmm.
Either as an example for a soapbox, which I have no problem with. I have no problem with stripping people of their deeper meaning,
their entire humanity.
to just judge them on one thing. However, like, for a movie, I just didn't. I felt like this was Willem Dafoe's show, or the director's story, and everyone else was a set piece in his own life. Even his wife.
My wife
doesn't have many particular dimensions to her. She's perhaps the most fleshed out of all the characters, but that's not saying that she's fleshed out. In a sense, she's more reacting to his choices, and he frames it in the sense of her living through him. And that, granted, that's part of, I think, the charm of his character, his narcissism, which I'm drawn to, but that doesn't speak well for the secondary. So I'm probably going to give this a 0, even though there are characters I liked. I liked the father of the Hindu boy, although it's 2 lines or so in the entire film. But it's about it's through the eyes of the director the entire time.
Certainly. So, like, I guess all I want
just one last thing. If you ever seen the 30 Rock episode with I Wonder How Tracy Morgan Looks at the World, and it's all him talking everywhere. So, yeah.
I get it, but I just wanted to... The fact that you mentioned that, I thought his wife, Livia, I believe was her name, she had the most complete arc. But you're saying, like, it's shallower compared to everything else because it's his show. Like, I certainly agree with that. But I still think I'm kind of debating it because I liked his Hindu friend, even though he wasn't, like, even the titular character wasn't in it that much. But what was there, I thought, was very nicely done. Go on.
Calling this my Hindu friend is like calling Star Wars The Adventures of Grand Moff Tarkin.
All right. I know you've been fucking waiting to say that. Like, I get it. I understand that. But I think, like, his friends and family, like, there's a whole arc with his brother, like a subplot with his brother and, like, and that, and all that. So, like, I think that it did a lot. It went a long way to fleshing it all out. But it's tough because, yes, I certainly see the fact that, or the way they were portrayed, many of them are one-dimensional, like, at best. His wife being the one that had the most dimensions, maybe, like, we'll say 2.5 dimensions, as I sometimes use as an arbitrary thing. But no, like, that's why I'm kind of stuck on it, because I think what was there was solid enough, but it also wasn't the focal point of the whole narrative as a whole, right? Of the overall narrative. So I'm kind of tripped up. So with that, go ahead. What do you guys think?
So the supporting characters did not do it for me in this film. They all, outside of, like, I agree with you, Ian. I think they all seemed one-dimensional, 1.5, I guess, as we say, like at most. But on top of that, the acting seemed really wooden, and I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that they were not speaking in their language. Like, not only that, but, like, they're being direct. Like, I believe I saw that the only reason that this movie is all in English is because Willem Dafoe didn't know how to speak Spanish. Like, it was basically like everybody had to act around him because they got Willem Dafoe in it, which I think they probably should have gone with somebody else and made it a Portuguese language, but whatever. Like, I think that you lose a lot in all these characters because it felt like I think I wrote this down as I was watching the movie. It felt like every character was reading the subtitles of a movie as they were acting their parts.
I see what you mean in retrospect. And, like, sure,
that's what it felt like. I felt like I was listening to somebody. Like, it felt like I was listening to a dubbed dubbed later on. Except that was actually what they were saying. And
super harsh about this.
I mean, it really bugged me because I think that the portrayals could have been a lot better if they were in Portuguese or in the main language of the actors. Brazilians,
Argentini.
It's Brazilian Portuguese.
Stop it, please. Brazilians speak Portuguese. That's the
they speak Brazilian Portuguese.
They speak a dialect of Portuguese, but the language is Portuguese. So I think that it would have been much better if the movie was in the language that it was written for. It felt like it was a movie that was written in Portuguese, translated to English, and then acted in English by Portuguese or by Brazilian actors. So, like, I don't know. It felt like there was a lot lost in the multiple translations that happened, and I think that the supporting characters lost a lot in that. That being said, I don't think there was a lot for anybody else to do other than Willem Dafoe as well. So I'm going to give it a 0 for supporting, for the reason that you said, and for the reasons that I said. This was one of the bigger sticking points for me. It felt like every other actor had to act like outside of their comfort zone around Willem Dafoe in this movie. And Willem Dafoe was good, but that meant everybody else was worse.
Sort of like lesser.
Yeah.
That's a very good point.
I actually like the supporting characters. I really want to get into specifics, and I won't. I do like... there's 3 characters I actually liked in it, or actually 4. One of them being the common man, the boy's father, and Sophia, which I will leave. But the reason I'm going to give the supporting characters a 1 is because when they gave him. Part of the film, having a supporting character was a relief to get away from him in a weird way, but also it was fun to watch him troll people that were him at the same time. And like I said, I agree with you, Steve-O. I think some stuff was lost in the translation, that they could have been stronger, but I felt that they served their purpose. They got you outside of Diego's character as well as kind of inside of him because they were a reflection of who he was at any stage of his life. Even if he grew, some of these people didn't. My favorite being when he's staying at his friend's house and that social situation. the way he trolled those people. So I'm going to give him a 1 because I thought they were effective.
It's tough because originally I was on your side, Chris. Like, that's how I was thinking about it. But Steve-O and E, you guys do make good points, so it might have just pushed me over to a soft 0. But I think that's where I'm gonna come down. Even though I seemed like initially I was gonna give them more credit, but as you guys talked about, I think like it's just not enough retroactively analyzing it. But so soft 0, but 0.
Okay. So that's the scores on that. Chris, why don't you tell us about the dialogue?
The dialogue. Well, this is going to probably balance out my supporting character because I do know there's nothing wrong with the dialogue, but I do, to your point, Steve-O, do think there was something in the translation that was lost. I mean, it was there, and there were certain times I do think it was honest. Like I said at the beginning, where his wife says, or at that time his fiance said, "I wish it was me that was dying," and he says, "Like bullshit. I wish it was you dying too." But overall, I thought more was given not to what was said, but to what was happening. If that makes sense. If that makes sense, like when you put it, pepper by itself is a spice seasoning, and when you put it in a greater context, it actually adds to it. So if dialogue is a seasoning in a bigger thing, then it contributes to the bigger thing, but isolated in of itself, I'm going to go on a 0 because any to your point, any criticism that I was going to put into supporting, I'll move to here. So I'm going to, for that reason, I'll give it a 0.
Now, I am oddly reversing it in a sense. I actually enjoyed the dialogue quite a bit. I see the sort of translation-ish problems, like maybe it would have been a little bit certainly different and possibly better were it not for like the fact that they had to speak English. However, given that, I actually enjoyed some of it quite a bit. I got a number of chuckles out of it when it was like trying to be like the troll parts, as you said, when he was doing that kind of stuff, and even some of the more serious parts when he had, intense conversations with his brother, with his wife, right? Like sort of like the tense moments. I thought worked for me quite a bit more than they didn't. So I might reverse it, like give it a decent to solid 1, at least starting out with, and then, unless you guys convince me, so go D.
I agree with you, Scott. The fight scene between him and his wife was very good, very intense. Now, granted, that's partly the style and the blocking of the scene and the action as you're going to the scene, but it was when he says that when I see you naked, I don't desire you anymore. I think it was. It was a harsh line, and the way he said it too was like very cold and matter of fact, and you could tell the layers of it when you can tell that this was what he felt would be the harshest
how to hurt her
say
the most,
to her at that point. And when he's talking to certain characters in the when you see him writing and kind of crafting his work, it's actually like we also used to be writers back in the day. Like it reminded me of what it was like to come up with scenes and the way he was excited when he's building new work. It worked for me.
Yeah, I think it worked for me more than it didn't. So good.
There were moments of really good dialogue in this. I agree with that. There were also moments of pure cringe for me. And like there were moments where I was like, oh, man, this is like not written. This isn't well written. And like it may not even be that it wasn't well written, but maybe it just wasn't well translated, and then well translated by the I feel like this is a work that's translated twice, and that
it sort of
for
loses
me
a lot.
that really it loses a lot. There's like just these like connective tissue that gets lost for me, and like I feel like I can't give the dialogue a 1 because like a lot like there was so much cringe on certain parts of it that were not intended. Now there were moments of cringe that were intended in this movie, and that's fine. I'm not like I'm not like talking against those moments. I'm talking about the moments that were like somebody thought this was a good, like he thought this was a good line when he wrote it, and by the time it got translated twice, maybe that was the problem, or maybe it just wasn't good when it started off. I don't know, like I can't say, but like there are moments where I am like, this is a terrible line of dialogue. Somebody should have rewritten this. And for that reason, I don't think I can, in good conscience, give dialogue.
Even though I disagree with you on it, I'm going to think that the way I had a problem with the de-aging an Irishman, I feel, and you didn't. Yes. I feel it's the same way that this didn't bother me, it bothers you, but I can sympathize with it because even though I don't understand where you're coming from, I now understand where you're coming from.
I think you're absolutely right on with that.
Yeah,
like,
well said.
There were moments of like, oh my god, what? Like it was like nails on a chalkboard for me at certain points, and like I cannot forgive it.
No, fair enough.
Fair.
I'm gonna give it a 0. Ian, Scott, you're giving it a 1. Yep. Chris, you sticking with 0?
Yeah, I was back and forth on it because I see your points with that, and I agree. There, some of the dialogue is great and it's very, very honest. But a lot of times, like I said, like with the trolling stuff, it seems to meld between what I'm seeing, who I'm seeing, and what's being said. Mm. So it's very difficult, and we have a binary scale because this would be a great 0.5.
Sure.
But I'm going to stick with a 0 for now. I do appreciate what you and Scott said, and it might be a softer 0, but because I agree with a lot of what you said and certain things, I'm trying to create a balance. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got those scores in. Scott, why don't you go to style?
So I think this is one of the stronger points of this film in that there are a lot of I noticed, for me particularly, the lighting was fantastic in many of the shots. And for example, I try to keep it vague, but there's a scene in the hospital where it felt as if you were the patient. Like doctors are just like, it cuts like a lot of like close-up shots and doctors like explaining all this stuff. And it's like, it feels overwhelming. Yeah. Like it would be as if you were in the situation. And we mentioned the party scene. I thought that whole scene I thought was quite well done. It was funny and again, well shot, well blocked. You mentioned the blocking, I believe, earlier, E. And the score was solid enough. I think I said to you guys precast, it's something like, it's kind of the music you expect for a film like this, but it still fits very well. And I just think, many of the overall shots were quite beautifully, quite excellently composed. So I have to give them a lot of credit there. And it's just, while the story, as we said, the narrative may be a bit disjointed, each section of it was, again, shot at the cinematography of it all worked quite well. So I have to give it a lot of credit overall. And I think the style is maybe secondary, like equal to the protagonist in terms of the high caliber, the high quality of it. So I'm giving it a very strong 1.
I'm going to say to style, I love the style. And I also want to say that all the style is a great culmination of everything. Whether it's a 0 or 1 in my book, the culmination of what's out there really gelled stylistically. Having visited my grandpa when he was basically in an oxygen tank and watching the way somebody is in pain, watching what Dafoe did really affected me, as were certain moments when he's speaking to somebody who might be a specter, maybe not. Were kind of like the catharsis of that, where the intellectual part and not the visceral part or the physical part, but whatever place our mind goes to. Scott, the lighting, right on the money, right on the money. The lighting was great. I loved they did a really good job of flashing between some things that were kind of on the fantasy side versus the, more of a documentary style. I'm blocking what we call that. I love the style of this movie. I thought it was very, 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 very strong.
Well, I loved the actual, specifically about the score, I believe it was piano music when the guy's painting. I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah.
But on that point, I love magical realism. This isn't quite magical realism. This is imagination realism, which I'm quoting right now. It's him going into into his kind of world that he builds for, like, it's never, aside from maybe one scene, it's never meant to be mistaken for reality.
Yes,
it's
true.
Him, like, for instance, here's one where he's in the hospital beside his Hindu friend, to drop the title. they do a World War II scene, which they're fighting through the trenches with but they have
plastic gun,
plastic guns,
super soakers,
but
or whatever.
the background changes to the trenches and all that, and it's never meant to portray them being there. It's more meant to portray that imagination and how him being with that kid sparked up his childhood imagination again, and less grim than what he was doing prior, imagining.
Escapism.
And then that escapism is I used to do that as a kid too. I'd picture myself in
various situations
as a kid, and this is what I really enjoyed. That that was the most optimistic part of this pretty dreary movie.
Yeah.
The fact that you could escape into it.
Yeah, I completely agree. The style of this movie is hands down for me the strongest part of it. As you guys have all mentioned, the cinematography is terrific. There's great light. The lighting is fantastic in it. There are terrific musical cues throughout. The soundtrack in general, or the score in general, is really good. I'm trying to remember if there was anything else I wanted to mention about it. I think you guys have said everything that I was going to say.
Certainly, the style is a highlight of a.
And there are a lot of moments that that do highlight that style. Ian mentioned one of them. I won't spoil any more for you, because watch the damn movie if you really want to know. But it is really like a class in filmmaking,
composure,
right?
if you will. Yeah.
Forget about the dialogue, forget about the story. Just watch this movie and see what this director makes on the screen. It's really impressive. So I'm going to give it a 1 in terms of that. I think it's 1s all around, right?
Yep, I believe so, yeah.
And that's going to lead to me with recommendation. This is a tough one. I'm probably not going to recommend it. I don't know. I just think, you could watch worse movies. Don't get me wrong. It's not like this is a terrible movie. But it is like a downer, and at a lot of times it's like
there's notes of positivity though.
It's kind of there are
just to counter that.
There are notes of positivity, and by the end it's kind of a hopeful movie, right? But there are moments of cringeworthiness to me, and that really breaks me out of whatever the movie's trying to do. Like I said, if you really want to, honestly, here's who I'll recommend it to. If you really want to watch something stylistically, if you're going to school for filmmaking, if you want to see somebody who's really good at lighting a scene, at blocking a scene, at framing a scene, how to bring music into your movie beautifully, check out this movie. If you're just looking for a flick to watch on a Friday night,
it's not a lighthearted.
It's probably not.
Sure.
It's probably not what you want to check out. So,
I actually thoroughly enjoyed the film. I think Willem Dafoe does a fantastic job. It's one of the best things I've seen when he dedicates himself to this. And I think that for whatever flaws are in this film, it's not a perfect movie by any means. It hit the beats I like. It was a good performance, good artistically. I enjoy that magical realism style, even if it's a subset of that. I would. And there's plenty of nudity as well.
Yeah. There is a ton of nudity.
There's a ton.
Listen,
some of it might
if you're a 15-year-old boy, you're gonna fucking love this movie.
I'm a 15-year-old boy at heart, so
a narcissistic one.
There's times that, if you're 15-year-old boy actually or in heart, you can always press pause.
Yeah.
All right, go on.
There are parts of this film that are very uncomfortable to watch because I'm going to say it's a very honest film, because there are situations that are just uncomfortable, and that if you're in the room, you'd be like, I'm fucking going home, or I'm going to leave, and I because somebody watching or listening to this may not always be familiar with our stuff, because we do a binary scale. Sometimes we really have to split hairs as to whether we're giving a 0 or 1. But with regard to a recommendation, this film, yeah, I really recommend this film. I did have to walk away from it. My wife was playing a video game and she was in a card tournament. I'm like, can I play this round for you? Because I needed to get out of it because it is an honest film. It is a real film, but it's not an unpleasant film. And this has been in the back of my mind since I saw it. It keeps surfacing and I really have to strongly recommend this movie. It's uncomfortable, Steve-O. It's not a lighthearted film, but it is a very honest film, and it is definitely a schooling film. It is definitely a good film to watch just as a piece of art. So I strongly recommend this movie.
I'm going to recommend it for mainly one big reason and maybe one smaller one. I would say I'd recommend it more than I wouldn't. And I think like maybe this is my personal interest. It's a fascinating look at an artist self-reflecting about a time and a period in his life. That's, like you said, it's just a messy situation. And I kind of like that stuff. It's a slice of life kind of tale, right? So yeah, it might have, the cracks in the veneer, but I find that very interesting to watch. And like you said, Steve, also just as a piece of cinema, artistically, I think visually it's something to be seen. So like while the story might not be the most mind-blowing thing in the world, I think it still deserves to be seen more than it doesn't. And I would say, yeah, check it out.
So we once read a philosophical piece about the artists reflecting upon their life. How often they'll sacrifice the truth for the narrative. Or, like, I was always meant to become an artist, thus, all these events in my life are tied into that path. And I'm going to ignore the events that weren't tied to this. This is almost the opposite of that.
Yeah, it's the reverse of that kind of.
I'm going to give you the truth as I remember it, is how he starts it out with. And it isn't a perfect narrative, but it is honest.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for honesty in this world.
It's a pure reflection, but doesn't have... Yeah, exactly. Well said.
Well, all right. That's going to do it, right? Unless anybody else has anything to say, I'm going to give the scores here. The three of you gave it an 8, and is one of our biggest departures that I can remember. Gave it a 5, which... leaves it at an aggregate, I believe, of a 7.25.
Which is pretty, I think, spot on.
Which is a very solid
I think it's well above average, but
film.
Yeah, not like amazing.
I feel like I'm going to be called a clueless weasel at some point in the near future.
You certainly are.
And...
Yeah.
And...
I hope Dafoe himself berates you.
Listen, Dafoe,
that'll get you the interview.
You're welcome to berate me if you want to come on our show and do it. All right?
Or send a video message. We're open to this.
No, I mean that's an above average score, right? 7.25.
Yeah. So to go through it, I gave I gave it a little bit of a lower score on the plot than everybody else. I also gave only one of us gave a 1 on supporting. That was Chris.
Mm-hmm. You sort of split
dialogue split us in half. And I'm the only one that gave it a 0 on recommend. So that's kind of where we came down with everything. And it's 7.25. And I think that's going to do it for My Hindu Friend or My Last Friend, as it's going to be done in the U.S. And I believe, before I pass off to you, I believe this is going to be coming out on the 15th. As you can tell from everybody else, don't listen to me, listen to everybody else and go check it out.
It sounds like you're recommending it.
We're putting a bunch of info as well.
I just want to say, please change the name for My Hindu Friend because 1, it's mildly uncomfortable, and 2, it has nothing to do with the film.
Yes, agree. My Last Friend is slightly better, but also doesn't really mean anything. Although
I would prefer My Last Friend.
It could mean more than one character. It could mean basically every other character.
Yeah, I was going to say,
as opposed to the one character who is in the first 8 minutes.
That is a great point. If you call it My Last Friend, it is modular in a sense.
Yeah. I think I like that a lot.
Yeah,
Anyway, we're gonna. That'll be our last thoughts on this.
Right.
I have been your host, Stephen Mosi, joined tonight by Ian Manzer,
my Steve-O friend,
Chris Morgan,
live long and prosper,
and Scott Thurlow.
And I will be trolling at a socialite party sometime soon. See you next time. Good night.
Editing and engineering by Christopher Morgan. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates. Or Mott's?